what I'm going to go through are going to be the 5 most common non-compliance testing mistakes that we come across from our role when we're doing the annual review and compliance testing. And then I'm going to touch on the compliance testing itself that happens each year. So I did laugh a little when Elke said they're easily fixable. They are relatively easily fixable if they're identified timely, and to just kind of make sure that you stay on top of what's going on with your plans. So the whole purpose of the annual review and the compliance testing is to make sure that the plan is operating in accordance with the document provisions. The plan is always set up to benefit all of the employees, not just one specific group. And the purpose of the test in general is going to be to make sure that that is actually happening. All retirement plans are subject to IRS regulations, and these tests are mandated each year. They're called non-discrimination tests. The top-heavy test and the average deferral percentage or the average contribution percentage tests are often the biggest problems each year for employers when it comes to compliance testing. Plans can't remain in a failed status. There is a correction method if you fail an ADP test, if you fail an ACP test, if you fail a coverage test. Any of the compliance tests, there's always a corrective method that's already more or less built in to how plans operate. And then for the other type of failures that we're going to talk about are the plan mistakes that occur the most more frequently. Those fall under the employee plans compliance resolution system, and that is regulations from the IRS about how to correct them, what procedures to follow, and things of that nature. So we're going to go right into the first group of them. And so employee enrollment and deferral elections. Almost all of your common mistakes fall under these top 5 items. The very first one is going to be to failure to timely enroll your participants. Every employee who meets the plan's eligibility criteria is required to be provided with all applicable plan notices and enrollment materials. This is true regardless of whether the employee intends to participate or eventually chooses to not defer into a plan. Even if a participant does not choose to make deferrals, they may otherwise qualify for employer non-elective contributions such as a safe harbor contribution or a profit sharing contribution. So it's always important that you provide all of the information and that they do enroll so that if they do get a contribution from the employer, that their account is properly set up. Participants who are not enrolled timely may be entitled to corrective contributions along with earnings, and this comes at the expense of the plan sponsor. Now, I will tell you that right away, the most important thing is going to be based on facts and circumstances in every instance. So just because this is a similar issue to something that happened to maybe another plan employer that you're talking to, or maybe one of your business associates also had the same kind of issue, the facts and circumstances for every correction and every issue have to be examined before you can apply a correction method to make sure that you're correcting fully the issue at hand. When I say that it can come at the expense of the plan sponsor, the example being, if you don't enroll a participant and say everybody else has enrolled in the plan and for some reason you forgot that Mary was eligible and you never gave her the paperwork. If everybody else has been eligible and is contributing to the plan at 6%, Mary is going to be entitled to a 3% contribution plus 100% of whatever the match is, as an example. So if the rate she gets is 3%, then plus she will get the full match. This would be a 9% contribution, and this money does come from the plan sponsor. This does not go back. You do not rerun it through a payroll system. You do not withhold it from her paycheck. This is a contribution out of your pocket. Now, if you correct it timely, where maybe they were supposed to enroll in January and instead you caught it in February, depending on the other facts and circumstances, you may not have to make the extra contribution. Maybe there's enough time for the participant to make up what was missed initially. Again, it's all facts and circumstances. The longer the issue occurs, then the more costly it can become. This is also going to be similar to the failure to follow a participant's election. For example, say Mary was given the opportunity to enroll and she was deferring at 3%, and later she changed to 5%, but you didn't put that into the payroll system. So for the rest of the year, you only withheld 3%. If your plan falls into audit, which is when this usually gets caught, or when the participant actually look at their paycheck, because sometimes, as we know, participants don't look at their paychecks and they may not notice this. If for some reason you're not withholding what the participant has elected, this again is an employer contribution. You're failing to follow the direction of your employees. And that then can result in a corrective contribution as well. Similar circumstance, that again is an employer contribution. Any missed match contribution that they may have been owed on the 2% that they weren't deferring because you hadn't put that into their payroll, you would still be required to give them that full amount. On the flip side, if there is a failure to follow a participant's election, say the deferral rate was at 5% and they wanted to change it to 3%, and you didn't make that change, you are now withholding more than you have authorization from that employee. And yes, it's going into their retirement plan account, but maybe they had another purpose. Maybe they needed those funds for something else, and you're not following their election. The corrective method for that could be they may be entitled to a refund. If they get a refund, then maybe their money gets forfeited, the match that was related to that. The employee may say, no, it's fine. We're just going to leave it in there and just change it going forward, please. But there's going to need to be a communication with the employee. You're going to want to document the issue, and the sooner that it's caught, the better it is for everybody, both you and the employee. Another item that comes up quite frequently, and again, this is going to be something that typically comes up in an audit. And when I say an audit, I'm talking about a larger plan that has an independent audit by an outside CPA firm. And that is the use of the wrong compensation. So typically most plans include all compensation except for compensation prior to being eligible for participation. Sometimes plans choose to exclude bonuses or commissions, and that's allowable. You can do that. You can choose to exclude those types of compensation. However, unless it is explicitly excluded in the plan document or a special election form has been submitted, whatever election is on file for an employee at the time that you pay them that bonus, you should be applying that to their bonus payment. A lot of times bonuses get entered in as a separate payroll run because they have a separate special tax rate that must be withheld. And you need to make sure that you're including that compensation and adding the deferral election to those bonuses unless the employee has indicated otherwise. It's the same kind of correction. It does come up frequently in audits, and the correction is the same. The process is to go back and calculate, well, if I gave you a $30,000 bonus and you should have deferred 10%, well, now as the plan sponsor, you need to make up that contribution plus the lost earnings. So you want to be very careful and have a documented procedure. Make sure that you are always, checking and staying on top of how you implement deferral elections, how you receive them, how your participants submit them, and just kind of doing some self-checks and verification. One of the other items that might come up in the process when you're going through enrollments and deferral election is that maybe you're including people who might otherwise be ineligible. And maybe that option is, you thought after 1 year of service, they just got to come in right away, but actually the plan says that they only get to enter the plan on 2 entry dates, January 1st and July 1st. So for example, if somebody is hired in August of 2022, they met their year of service in August of 2023, and you have 2 entry dates. Technically, that employee wouldn't be eligible to come in until January 2024, but you accidentally let them enroll in September of 2023, and now you've withheld contributions and they've deferred into the plan. There are a couple options. You can choose to keep them in the plan, and you can do a corrective amendment. When it comes to corrective amendments, as Michelle had indicated, there are requirements that you have to follow within the document. And you have to be careful that this is not discriminatory. If you accidentally hired a new CEO and accidentally let them in a little bit early, that could be viewed as a discriminatory practice. And if it's discriminatory, you could create more problems than you anticipate by letting them in, because now you've let one person in early, and to be non-discriminatory, now you need to let in all these people early, which means you have to make up contributions. So the other option then is to remove them from the plan. And you would do that by making the participant whole, refunding any deferrals that they had, plus earnings. If the funds have lost value, you would have to make that up out of pocket. And you would then forfeit to an unallocated account or a forfeiture account any matching contributions that that employee received but was not entitled to. The big one that comes up the most, and when I say the most, I would say probably 80% of the plans that I look at have, in one way or another, some sort of an issue with the timely remittance of contributions. And the IRS and the Department of Labor have specific guidelines as to when you need to make your contributions. At a minimum, you should be following your payroll schedule. So if you pay biweekly, then your deposits should be made biweekly. If you pay weekly, then your contributions to the 401k plan should be deposited weekly. At maximum for a small plan, it is 7 to 10 business days. If you have shown that you can do this on a regular basis at 5 days, then should the plan be audited by the IRS or the DOL, or if it becomes a large plan and you're showing that you can deposit faster, they may say that anything outside of that 5-day window is considered late, because you've proven to them by your consistent actions or your ability 2 or 3 times to make a deposit sooner rather than later. So you want to make sure that you establish a process for submitting your contributions, and you want to document it. You want to know where it's located and who handles it in your absence. If you handle payroll and you don't have a backup, you go on vacation, or if something happens and you get sick, who's going to take this over? There's a lot of facts and circumstances that can fall into situations like that. But if you can regularly submit payroll for your employees when you're unavailable, then you should also be able to submit contributions. So you want to make sure that that gets taken care of. Another note that I put on here was the earliest reasonable date. This is language that's used by the IRS, and in some instances, this could be considered as few as 2 to 3 days. There's automation in the world for everything. There's automatic payroll feeds, things of that nature. So you want to be consistent with your deposits. When you do have late deposits, you want to correct them as soon as possible, and the correction process has multiple steps. When you go through the process, the first thing you want to do is to make sure that you actually make the contributions that were missed as soon as possible. You then want to make sure that you're calculating any related lost earnings and submitting those as quickly as possible. The reason that lost earnings are owed is because late deposits are actually considered a prohibited transaction. You are essentially borrowing your employees' money once the rest of their paycheck has been made available to them. So if your employees are paid on Fridays, on Friday when payroll is run and the rest of their money goes into their bank account, except their salary deferrals remain in your account, that is now a loan to you from your participant. It's no longer your money because it was theirs, and you still have not put it yet into the plan. The longer that process occurs, the longer your loan from the employee lasts, and that's where the lost earnings comes in. Prohibited transactions are reportable on the Form 5500 that is filed for your plan every single year. Along with that, there's also the Form 5330, which is an excise tax reported to the IRS with a 15% penalty. Now, if you were looking at small amounts for just a couple days and small related lost earnings, you might be thinking, well, that's not a big deal. that, we can get this in, I'll make my deposits, once a month. This is what I've always been doing. It only takes one participant to file a complaint with the Department of Labor. And the process for making complaints and how to handle stuff like that is actually in the summary plan description that goes to all of your participants. There was an article that I received a copy of last week from one of the many newsletters that I received, and it said that the Department of Labor is now suing their third plan sponsor in 2024 for the failure to deposit contributions timely. It is an issue, and it is an issue that they're looking to crack down on. As an RPC, handling plans and working with the rest of the team and others in the company, this is probably the most common issue that we see. And we don't review your deposits unless you use our 316 services, which I think somebody will talk about that tomorrow. But this is on the plan sponsor to make sure that contributions are being withheld and then contributions are being deposited. It's something that we can't stress enough, that you need to make deposits timely. So if this is something that we're bringing up to you and we're bringing it up repeatedly, you really want to look at what your processes are, what can you change, how can you make it better, and you want to fix it as soon as possible. So the second part of what I have to share has to do with the actual compliance testing that goes on every year. And there are a couple different areas of testing that I'm just going to touch on. There's a lot of information, and I'll give a couple examples as to how it can affect the employees. First of all, there's general limits testing, and there's two of them that come into play when you're looking at overall contributions and things of that nature. The first one is what's called the 402G. It's the salary deferral limit. Every employee gets one salary deferral limit when you're looking at your W-2 contributions. And so even if I work for two employers and I participate in two 401k plans, I only have one 402G limit. For 2024, it's $23,000. If you're over age 50 by the end of 2024, so if at any time during 2024 you're going to be 50 years old, you could defer an extra $7,500. And then this limit will also increase, I think, starting in 2025, if I remember when Betsy had indicated those special catch-up contributions were going to kick in. The other limit is called the annual additions, or the 415 limit. And this is a plan limit. So if I participate in two plans with two different employers and completely different employers, then I may be able to have contributions to the maximum in both plans. And that contribution limit for 2024 is $69,000. The amount that's included in that $69,000 is for all contribution types. And so that means my salary deferrals, any safe harbor contributions, any match contributions, if there's a profit sharing contribution, if there's an allocation of forfeitures to my account. That is all considered underneath this limit. When an employee has excess contributions, the amounts have to be refunded or reduced. If the refund is a salary deferral, then those need to occur before April 15th so that they're avoid any of the negative tax consequences for the participant. After April 15th, you get into some double taxation issues, and so that's important to note. And the 402G limit, in case I didn't say this, this is a calendar contribution. And so that means that even if your plan operates on a non-calendar year, the 402G limit goes with your W-2 calendar year. So I have an example here of a general limits testing where you will see that there's going to be a refund of salary deferrals. And so the 415 limit, here we have for Frank, his compensation is $21,000 and he is not over 50. So he decides he's going to defer 100% of his paycheck. He only works to save for retirement and his sanity. That's it. The plan document has a required 10% profit sharing contribution, and it has a safe harbor non-elective contribution, which is 3%. Since those two contributions are required, they get calculated first when we look at the limits. So for example, his $21,000 compensation, he would end up with 2,100 in profit sharing, 630 in deferrals, plus his salary $630 in non-elective contributions. Adding in his deferrals would give him a total of $23,730. He's over his compensation limit. He's over the 415 limit. His deferrals will be the amount to get refunded. And that's because the document has the required contributions. So even though he was able to defer originally up to the full amount, he may end up with a refund in the end of his own money. The next set of compliance tests have to do with non-discrimination. And when it comes to non-discrimination, there are two classifications within the plan that we look at, and they are the highly compensated employees and non-highly compensated employees. A highly compensated employee is anyone who owns directly 5% of the employer at any time during the current or the prior year. This also includes spouses, children, parents, or grandparents through family attribution. Additionally, any non-owner who exceeds the compensation limit set forth in the prior year is also highly compensated. So for example, somebody who earns $150,000 in 2023 is an HCE in 2024. If they earn $155,000 in 2024, they'll be an HCE in 2025. The classification of highly compensated versus non-highly compensated comes into your coverage and non-discrimination testing. So coverage and non-discrimination testing. These apply to each money type that are being contributed to the plan each year. The purpose of coverage testing is, are enough of your employees eligible to receive a contribution? We're not looking at how much they receive at this point. We're just looking to see if enough people are eligible to receive that type. 401k is salary deferral. If you see something that references a 401m, that is an employer match contribution that would be based on the deferral, or a non-elective, which is a 401a contribution unrelated to a participant's deferral. Think profit sharing, safe harbor, non-elective. Again, of those eligible and receiving a contribution, does the amount allocated then discriminate against the non-highlies? This is where we're going to fall into the non-discrimination testing. Coverage testing issues that come up. It is allowable to exclude a specific group of employees. You can do this based on job type, locations, departments, the types of pay, maybe they're commission-only employees. Generally, 70% of the non-highly group must be covered by the plan to pass testing. Just because you exclude somebody does not exclude them from being counted when we do testing. So for example, if you are excluding all of your people at location B from the plan, they may not receive any contributions, but when we go to do the test, they do count in the denominator, and we would need the information, at least a count of who those people are. An excluded employee is different from an employee who elects to not defer. Do not confuse not eligible for benefits such as health insurance, PTO, as not eligible for the retirement plan. Eligibility for the retirement plan is governed by the plan document only. One of the most common statements that we get when we're working on information is that we'll be working with clients and someone will say, it's open enrollment. It's open enrollment for all of these plans, or they're not eligible for benefits. Just because an employee is not eligible for your health care benefits does not mean that they're not eligible for the retirement plan. And that can be a big issue, and that can lead to missed opportunities to defer and corrective contributions. So if you have questions, be sure to ask your RPC. In the event that your plan does fail a coverage test, there are some options to correct that. The first one would be the people that are being excluded would be provided a contribution. So for example, say you're excluding all of your salary people from the employer match. They defer, but they don't get the match. And if you fail coverage, then the corrective option would be to provide the match contribution to enough people to pass the coverage test. One of the problems that you will see, or one of the recommendations that you will see retirement plan consultants make, or the sales department make, is that you don't generally exclude classifications from salary deferrals. It's one thing to make up an employer contribution, but if you fail coverage for a deferral contribution, you can't go back and retroactively force those employees to defer and give them the option to defer on money that they've already been paid. So you would have a more costly correction in that manner. Again, so you can provide the employer contributions, larger contributions maybe to those who are being made. But again, this could be costly. So just make sure that you work with somebody when you're talking about exclusions to make sure that you are not digging a hole for the plan or incurring an unexpected expense in any one year. The ADP test, ACP test, these are run each year for plans that don't use a safe harbor provision. And what these tests do is they compare the average salary deferral and employer contributions for your HCEs to your non-HCEs. When there is a failure for each of these tests, there are options to be reactive and to correct it. So if we're doing reactive corrections, maybe part of the deferrals are being recategorized as catch-up contributions if they're eligible and over age 50. Most of the time, refunds are made to the HCEs, and this can be a little bit of a PR nightmare when your highly compensated employees defer large amounts, and then after the end of the year, they get a refund check of the majority of their deferrals. Refunds, if they are required, must be processed before March 15th, which is why you will see a big push if your plan requires this type of testing early in the year. Anything that processes late will end up with a 10% excise penalty paid by the plan sponsor. The other option when you fail an ADP test is to allocate an employer contribution to eligible non-highlies to bring the results into a passing range. Again, this can get costly. And then lastly, one of the reactive options is to retroactively adopt a safe harbor non-elective provision. It's required at 4%. Again, that can be a cost. So things to consider for the ADP test when you're being reactive. Some proactive approaches when you're failing an ADP test is to look to next year. So one of the things you can do is you could limit the rates that your HCEs defer. This can result in your HCEs not maxing out their contributions. You can still fail testing. You can lose good employees because they can't contribute to their retirement plan. You can elect to use the top paid group, which is a document provision. If your plan doesn't use this, we can look at it. It would be an amendment to the plan. Sometimes this can help, but sometimes it can still result in a testing failure. And then lastly, one of the proactive items that you can do is you can adopt a safe harbor non-elective or a safe harbor match provision. When you use one of these provisions, you get a free pass and your HCEs can defer as much as they want. Safe harbor non-elective and safe harbor match are required contributions every year.
Julie?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just watching our time and I wanted to make sure you've got some fantastic stuff. So I think what we're going to end up doing is we may want to hold another session a little bit later because you've still got some great details. So we did have a question. I wanted to make sure that we got to that. Someone was asking earlier about correction for a failure for a timely enroll for a terminated employee. So is there a way for us to kind of talk a little bit about that? What happens if you fail to do a timely enroll for a terminated employee?
Yeah, so the correction still does apply, and I'll say this, and I know it's kind of discouraging to hear, but it is all facts and circumstances. Is how big of a failure is it? Is it just a one person? Is it a huge amount? Did you miss them by a couple days? Sometimes we have employees that terminate, they become eligible 3 days after, 3 days before they terminate. Things like that. So in short, yes, contributions would be required. For employees, any employees, it applies to all employees, including terminated employees. And so if they didn't set up an account, then what you would do is you would open an account within the plan for them, deposit the money into a default investment fund, and notify them of their benefits available to them.